And welcome back to another video here from the off-grid garage. Totally off-grid. Not. Actually, I wanted to talk about the settings in the solar charge controller today. Bulk, absorption, floating, and all this kind of stuff. And what I found to set them correctly, at least in the Victron charge controllers. But I'm still charging in bulk mode at the moment. 3.7 amps only. So yeah, we already have 4 o'clock in the afternoon and it is a bit cloudy outside, so there's not much solar coming in at the moment. I can still see that the voltage is rising even with charging only 3.5 amps now. But so far everything looks good. Since my last calibration and balance and absorption of the whole battery pack, they're all very close together. So you can see a 7 millivolt, 8 millivolt difference between 16 cells. So that's pretty good. And also you can see the cell with the lowest voltage is actually changing all the time. So it's not sticking with one cell anymore. It's constantly changing. So is the one with the highest, which is number 1 at the moment here. See, we are turning from bulk to absorption at 54.4. I don't think we will reach this, but the voltage is still rising. So I probably give it another half an hour and see if we are a little bit closer to the absorption. I wanted to show you something which I don't understand why people do that in regards to the settings in the solar charge controller. But it would be easier if I show you actually in the settings what I mean. But if we cannot reach the absorption today, I'll just talk about it and show you what I can. Okay, let's give it another half an hour and see how far the battery comes. Okay, even the sun is coming back now. And we got another 7.58 amps just a moment ago. The clouds are back and now we've got a really bad angle anyway on the solar panel. So there's not too much power coming on at 4:30 anymore on this side of the roof. You know, this is east side here and the sun is already in the west here, going down this way. So I need to put these other solar panels here on the roof as quick as possible. This gives me another 1.7 kilowatts. Yeah, another 1.7 kilowatts. I've got all the panels here, as you know. I've got the rails here. I need some more screws and little clamp thingies, whatever. And time is the constraining factor here. Anyway, guys, what I want to show you is today, and as soon as the current going down again, the voltage drops as well. That only shows that the cells are not saturated yet, so they need more time to absorb more energy. But if the voltage is going down because of clouds or something and your voltage of the cells drops as well, they are not saturated yet. This is just the charging voltage but not the cell voltage. Okay, let's go now to our Victron charge controller. It's 140 watt only coming. And we go into our battery settings. And you can see I use the user-defined battery preset settings here for the solar charge controller. If I change this one to select lithium iron phosphate here. Okay, so this is the pre-configured settings from Victron for lithium iron phosphate batteries. And we have a 48 volt battery system, so 60 cells in series, and it sets automatically the absorption voltage to 56.8. So 56.8 divided by 16, the frogs. I bet they can hear me talking in here and start making noise. Divided by 16 is 3.55. So this is the recommended setting in the solar charge controller from Victron for lithium iron phosphate. Yeah. So this is the absorption voltage of 3.55 volts. All good with that. The float voltage is set to 54 volts. So 54 divided by 16 is 3.375 volts. And then we have a quick look at the other settings here as well. We can turn on the expert mode, which gives us more details. The bulk voltage offset is 0.4. So we call this one the offset. 0.4 volts. Is that correct? Yeah, 0.4 volts. Okay. Absorption duration is 2 hours and the tail current is disabled. 2 hours I put behind there, and no tail current. Okay, everything else is off. Equalization is off. It's disabled. Temperature compensation, this is all off. This is all good. Okay, so these are the recommended pre-programmed lithium iron phosphate settings in the Victron charge controller. All right, so here's my problem. So the battery charges to, what is it here? So the battery charges to 56.8 volts, which is far too high from my perspective. I would say 3.55 is far too high to charge a battery to every single day. This is 100% state of charge. I think this is too high. So anyway, apart from that, so they're charging the battery to 56.8 volts. So this means we will have max amp into the battery. Yeah, whatever the controller, whatever your solar can deliver, it will pump it into the battery until it reaches the 56.8 volts. And then it goes from bulk into absorption. As per the settings, it will stay on absorption for 2 hours. So it will keep this voltage, 56.8 volt, constant for 2 hours. See, this is our constant voltage. Well, before, this was our constant current, yeah? As much current as possible into the battery. You know, from solar, it's not constant, but it's still called constant current because it charges as much amps into your battery as possible. So now we are on 56.8 volt, constant voltage. And as we have seen in our little graphic in my last video, the constant current here, and then your current tapers off like this at this point when you have constant voltage and constant current on this side of the curve. And they allow 2 hours for that. They've got no end current here. So even if the current goes to 0 and it has saturated all the 16 battery cells in your bank 100% charged, it will still keep them on 65.8 volt. Do you need to do that? Well, anyway, so 2 hours later, it will switch to float mode. Yeah, 2 hours have passed. It will, this is an I, and reduces the voltage from 56.8 to 54 volt. So this will turn off the charger altogether. There will be no current flowing in anymore into the battery because your battery is still at 56.8 saturated. And now the charger only applies 54 volt to the battery. So there's no current going into the battery anymore. No way. Okay, no big problem with that so far. But here's the deal. Now you're turning on load. You're turning on your inverter. You start using power from the battery bank. You know, it is noon. You've just fully charged your battery. And now what happens? You're taking this power to power your inverter. So all the power from your inverter is coming from the battery. The charger has turned off. The charger supplies 54 volt to the battery, right? Well, and now you've got sunny, hot Australian weather outside, you know, pure sunshine all afternoon long. You could harvest more energy and drive your inverter directly from the solar panels and not from your battery, but it's not going to happen because the solar charge controller has turned off. It has turned off and it's waiting for the battery to hit 54.0 volt. In between here, these two stages, there will be no charge happening from the solar charge controller. If you get close to the 54 volt though, the charge controller starts charging just a little tiny bit, so probably from 54.1 it will start charging the battery again with 0.1 amps. So this is like a little pre-charge just to sense the voltage or something. I'm not 100% sure why they are doing this, but that's what happens. But you know, if your inverter idles only, or if your inverter drives only a small load, well, maybe some light or a soldering iron or some other stuff on your workbench, you know, you're not pulling much load from your inverter during this time. It could take a considerable amount of time to get from 56.8 to 54 volt actually. Probably several hours. And again, in this time, there will be no power coming from the solar. Even if you've got full sunshine outside, there's no power coming from the solar because the charge controller is waiting for the voltage to drop to 54 volt. So once you have reached this, you have an offset of 0.4 volts. This means the whole charge cycle, bulk, absorb, float, will start again from the top. See, this is the charge cycle, and then it goes from here into there again. This is the whole charge cycle it does all the time. So it will trigger a new charge cycle once you hit the 54.0 volt minus the offset. So 53.6 volt, right? This is the offset it is waiting for until it starts a new cycle of life of charging. And 53.6 divided by 16, 3.35. 3.35 volts. So it is waiting for the battery to go down to 3.35 volts until it triggers the bulk again and turns on the charge controller and gives you the free energy. But you have used all your energy during all this time just from the battery, not from your solar charge controller, not from your energy from your solar panels, nothing, just from the battery. And when you hit this 53.6 volts, well, it could already be too late. It could already be 4:30 like here, and the sun is in a bad angle to your solar panels now. And now the battery has dropped and the solar charge controller turns on and you are charging with, you're charging only with 3.8 amps now instead of 20 before. So from here you can see it actually cycles the batteries between 3.55, which is the maximum voltage, and 3.35, which is the minimum voltage when the charge controller turns on again. So these are the two maximum and minimum points in the charge controller. Ah, shit guys, because I changed the settings in the solar charge controller, all my battery cells, they are all balancing at the moment. They are far too high. We are at 55.8 already. So what I will do now is go quickly in my charge controller and set this back to my settings. Okay, expert mode. See, I want to have this at 54.4 only, absorption. And the float is at 54, and the bulk offset is 0.001. Does it allow me? No, 10 millivolts, so 10 millivolt under the 54 turns back on. And the tail current, the solar charge controller will end absorption and switch to float when the charge current drops below the tail current threshold. So enable that. And I say, okay, if we reach 1 amp, or let's say even 2 amps tail current, we will switch to absorption, right? Okay, so these are my settings, and it switches to absorption straight away because we have reached the voltage. So now it should take only a minute or so until we see the float voltage here of 54 volt. And then there's nothing happening anymore. So, and because the current is now 0, and we go back into our BMS, the actual balancing will work because we are not charging the battery cells at the same time. You see this one peaked at 3.5 volts. And this is exactly what we can see here, 3.55 volts. Yeah, this is the setting of the Victron solar charge controller, and I think this is far too high already. You're charging your battery to 100% all the time. And I even think my my 54.4 volts is still too high. This is probably still 98% or something. And I have watched the smart shunt. It shows you the percentage what it thinks the battery is at, and also the battery voltage. And I think we can safely go down to 3.35 volts and have about 90% capacity still left of the battery. But I need to do further testing to actually confirm that. But this is just for my battery here. If you have a 24 volt or a 12 volt battery, there are different numbers. Well, this all needs to be confirmed, right? Okay, let's go back into our charge controller and see if it has switched to float. It has. See, there's my floating now. Okay, so this is all working fine. And now the charge controller has reduced the voltage from 54.4 volt to only 54 volt float. And then the whole cycle starts again with bulk. So it's waiting now. So if I turn on my inverter now and I use power here, it's not coming from the solar anymore. Even I've got still solar power here on the roof, it comes from the battery. And now it's waiting for the battery to reach 54 volt to start again charging from the solar charge controller. So my thinking is, if you are wasting, well, and then you look online, you know, here, and these are the recommended charge profiles for do-it-yourself lithium iron phosphate batteries. This is from Will Bros here. Hey, posted this one a while ago. So 48 volt LFP battery, absorption 58. This is like 3.62 volts or something, and then the float is again. And I think these two numbers are far too far apart from each other. You potentially waste a lot of solar energy while the charge controller is waiting for the voltage of the battery to drop from your maximum to your float voltage, then to restart the cycle again. So from all this, what I'm seeing here in the forums, and from all what I can see here, why don't we set the float voltage exactly the same as the absorption voltage? So here in my case, 54.4 volt float as well. And then we set the offset 0.1 volt offset. And this determines when my charger kicks in. So it charges the battery to 54.4 volt and then waits until it drops by 0.1 volt only, and then the charger kicks in again and supplies energy. So if I don't use any power, yeah, if the inverter is off, for example, the charge controller will go into absorption and then into float straight away and turn off charging. There will be no current going from the charge controller into the battery anymore. Nothing. But as soon as I use power, the charge controller will turn on again and supplies power to the system, to the battery and to your inverter, to keep this 54.4 volt. So the charge controller tries to keep the battery at this maximum level and also supplies energy to your inverter at the same time. So there is not much time where the actual system pauses in between, right? If you use power, if you don't use power, it will stay at 54.4, constantly charger turned off. So there's no floating or something. It will stay there until it drops to 54.3 again, the offset. So this is my thinking, and many people say, oh well, you just set the float voltage to a very low number because we don't use the float voltage in these scenarios. Well, if you would do this and then set this to, like, say, ridiculous 50 volts or something, yeah, the charge controller would never kick in again until the battery is almost empty. Well, 50 volt is empty, is it? Yeah, this would be 3.125 volts. So this is probably like 10%, 15% left in the battery. So the charge controller would never kick in then. I don't know why they recommend to do that. Is this different with other charge controllers? I have only used the GNG, whatever. And this actually does the same as the Victron. So you need to set the float voltage the same as the absorption to keep the battery at the maximum level and use the solar power for powering your inverter and your load. So I cannot imagine if this works any differently with other charge controllers, because this is the main purpose of it. The charge controller lowers the voltage from absorption to float and then tries to float your lead acid battery. And because we've got lithium batteries, they don't float. You know, there's nothing happening until you reach this voltage. And if you drop a little bit lower below the float voltage, it kicks in the bulk again and starts recharging the battery. Well, I don't know. So at the moment I've got this scenario set up here. So and if we go back into our solar charge controller now, we are still at 55.5. It has charged over this limit because I changed the settings to the default ones, and it kept charging to 56.8, which I didn't want, but I didn't realize the battery is actually full. So there should be still heaps of balancing happening here now, which is totally fine. But let's try that. Let's turn on the inverter now, because the battery is full anyway, and probably turn on some load here, the fan. Let's see if this is already enough. The Tesla charger is there, but it's not, the car is not plugged in at the moment. Now we're still at 55.5. So now we've got 20 millivolt difference here between all the cells, but they should balance out now. And even after charging the car yesterday for 1.5 to 2 hours around, and I pushed the battery down to about 75-80%, and after a bit of recovery for all the battery cells, the cell difference was only 5 to 6 millivolts across all the cells. So they really stayed together all the time during discharging and afterwards as well. So I think I have now successfully balanced the battery with my weird method from the last time. I also set the balance voltage here to 3.4 volt per cell as well. This is the maximum I get anyway when we have 54.4 and all the cells are 100% balanced. This is the same voltage. So everything above this will be balanced and capped. Yeah, and at the moment, because we had the charge controller changed to a higher voltage, it's balancing all the cells. It shouldn't have done this actually. Okay, so what I have done now is I have set the float voltage to 52.8 volt as per the recommendation, you know. And I just turned on the car charger here, and we are pulling 2 kilowatts from the battery at the moment. And there's still solar power out there, but you can see the the solar charge controller still sits on float. Even we are pulling so much power, we are not using any solar at all. So it will now wait until we reach the 52.8 volt float charge, and then the new cycle starts again. And I'm potentially losing out on solar energy now for an hour or so until it takes to drive down the battery to this value. And this makes me think of setting the float voltage to the same value as the absorption voltage. So if it drops only slightly, like now, it has already dropped. See, it has already dropped by almost 2 volts. It would turn on the solar charge controller straight away and gives me additional power from the solar panels to supply power to all my loads. But now it is waiting for 52.8, which is reached right now because we've got such a high load on there. But as I said, if you have a smaller load, this could take hours to reach. So we will now see the 52.8. So now we can see it's already starts charging in float mode because the voltage has dropped now, and it goes back to bulk in just a moment. There we go, we are now in bulk mode again, and now it's trying to recharge the battery to our 54.4 volt and delivers as much energy as possible to the system. So usually when I do this during the day, I can see almost all power is coming from the solar charge controller, from the solar panels directly to charge the car, and only a small portion, maybe 250 watts coming from the battery then. That's why I need to put these other solar panels on the roof here so I can charge the car with 100% solar. So to sum this all up here, the absorption is basically your turn off point, and the float is your turn on point again of this whole charge cycle. So should they not be very close together instead of far apart, as many people suggest this on the forums? See, I don't get the point why you would put them so far apart from each other. And it could take a long time to actually turn on your charge controller again then. Yeah guys, hopefully this all makes sense to you. Let me know in the comments down below what you have set your absorption and float. If this is the same, does it make sense to set them as the same? Or is this just a thing with Victron and the GANG, whatever it's called, charge controller? Maybe other charge controllers work completely different. I don't know. I'll leave this up to you guys. As always guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all your support here on the channel. You stay charged, of course, as much as possible from solar. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we shall see us again in the next video very soon. I'll keep charging the car because my battery is full now. Even it's peak time now. It's so good. Such a battery is so good. And then tomorrow when I'm at work, the system has time to recharge until I get back home. Amazing. All right guys, as always, thank you so much. See you in the next one. Bye bye. 40 watts. This is all we get.